Which is better, the Samsung Galaxy A36 5G or the Samsung Galaxy A35 5G? Well, in this video, we're gonna find out. So this is the Samsung Galaxy A36 5G, and this is the Samsung Galaxy A35 5G. Now obviously, the A36 5G is the successor to last year's Galaxy A35, and I'm definitely looking forward to showing you the differences and similarities between these two devices here in this video. Now obviously, the A35 is not a bad phone, and it's certainly not obsolete. This device was launched in March of 2024, and since then, in March of 2025, we got the Galaxy A36 5G. And in many ways, the A36 is more of an evolution compared to the A35, rather than being a major redesign. Now, the biggest visual difference between these two phones definitely has to be the camera modules. But with the A36, we do still retain a triple camera setup. It's just that now it's all in one pod versus individual circles for each camera module. And then both phones do have the flash in the same position. Now, another thing I like that was carried over from one generation to the other is the look of the back of the phones. So you can see here, it has kind of this like rainbow gradient effect, and based on the angle that you're looking at the back of these devices, it does look different. So I think that's really cool and very unique. Now this color is called Awesome Lilac, and then this one's called Awesome Lime. So going from one generation to the next generation, Samsung didn't even bother changing up the material on the back of the phone, but in this situation, I think that's actually a good thing. Another interesting thing about these phones too is that even though they are A-series devices, both phones do have glass on the back, but then both phones do have plastic on the sides, and then of course the display panels are covered in glass. But typically for phones in this segment, I am used to seeing a plastic back instead. Now side by side here, these two devices do look very similar. However, the display here in the A36 5G is slightly bigger at 6.7 inches compared to 6.6 inches. But both phones do have Super AMOLED displays. We're also getting 120Hz refresh rates on both phones, and then both phones do have 1080p display panels as well. In addition to that, we're getting a PPI of 385 with the A36 compared to a PPI of 390 with the A35. And then the A36 has a 87.7% screen to body ratio compared to 84.8% with the A35. So those are very small differences between these two phones when it comes to the displays. And I think the reason why it's not much different here with the A36 is because the A35 already has a great looking display panel. It really does look excellent. And then with these phones having Super AMOLED, we're getting great viewing angles. These displays are super bright and vibrant, so they look excellent. And they really are great for watching video content, reading articles, going on social media. All of that's gonna look great on these AMOLED displays. And even though there are resolutions out there that are higher than 1080p that are found on smartphones, these displays are still super crisp. Now the general designs of these two devices looking at the front panels is very similar. They both have nearly symmetrical bezels all around, and then up top here, we do have the hole punch for the front-facing cameras. Now with the A36, we're getting 12 megapixels for the front camera compared to 13 megapixels for the A35. And then with both phones, we are getting 128 gigabytes of storage, but both devices are offered in other storage configurations as well. Another thing to keep in mind is that with the A35 5G, we are getting microSD card expansion here, but then with the A36, there is no SD card expansion. So that is a very nice feature and certainly a make or break for certain people. I personally know people that even now in 2025 will only buy a smartphone if it has an SD card slot. So the options are certainly dwindling down for phones that actually offer that. But certainly, if that's important to you and you're trying to decide between these two devices, that might be a reason why you should go for the A35 instead. Now, neither of these two phones have wireless charging, but they do have in-display fingerprint sensors. So we'll try this first with the A36. So very fast and responsive. And then now for the A35. And also very fast and responsive. And then both devices do have face unlock as well for the front cameras. So it is nice that we are getting multiple methods for getting into the phones. Now taking a look at the camera modules in the back of these two phones, they both have 50 megapixel main cameras, 8 megapixel ultra wide angle cameras, and then 5 megapixel macro cameras for close-up images. And then both phones do support 4K video for the front and rear cameras, so that is great if you do like to shoot video in that resolution. But here's how things look on the camera apps on both phones. This is the main rear camera right now. Then from there, we can go over to 0.5 to go to the ultra wide camera. And then with that, you can fit a lot more content into a single frame here. Then going over to the More tab, we can access the macro camera on both phones. And then with macro, you can get very close up and you can really get as much detail as possible here with that mode. So that is great. Both phones also have portrait mode, so you get those blurred out backgrounds. And then also there is a selfie portrait mode too. And then there's even a group selfie option that crops out slightly. Now these two devices are actually running different processors from different brands. So with the A36, we are getting the Snapdragon 6 Gen 3 processor, whereas with the A35, we're getting the Samsung Exynos 1380. And then another difference too is that at least this version of the A36 does have 6 GB of RAM compared to this version of the A35 that has 8 GB of RAM. So definitely keep that in mind, because in a second here I will be showing you benchmark scores for the two devices. So I did run a benchmark test using Geekbench 6 on both phones, and I'll show you the scores right now. But basically, as you can see here, they are very similar. I personally do prefer Snapdragon processors over Exynos, and I've had a great experience so far with the Snapdragon 6 Gen 3, both on this device and other phones that I've used that have that processor. That's a really new processor, by the way, so it's great that the A36 is getting some of the latest technology from Qualcomm. But in general, both phones perform really well. They both run very smoothly. I don't necessarily think the Snapdragon 6 Gen 3 is a reason in itself to get the A36 5G, but it's certainly a bonus. And then another benefit with that too is that we're getting fast charging at 45 watts, but with the A35, it is limited at 25 watts. So we're getting basically double the amount of charging speed here with the A36. And then both phones do have 5,000 milliamp hour internal batteries, so even more of a reason to get that faster charging that the A36 5G offers. And then both phones do feature Android 15, but of course the A35 was updated to Android 15, and then both phones do have Samsung's One UI 7, which I really like. And then both phones have NFC, so you can use them for tap and pay. And then also they're both IP67 dust and water resistant, and we're also getting stereo audio with both devices as well. Now both phones, as I mentioned, have very similar designs to them, but on the left side here, both phones have nothing. On the right side, we're getting volume up, volume down on the power buttons. Up top here in the A36, we're getting the microphones. We also have a microphone with the A35, but then we also have the slot for the micro SD card and SIM card. Then on the bottom of the two phones, we have the slot for the SIM card for the A36 5G, microphone, speaker, USB-C port, and then we're getting the speaker, microphone, and USB-C port here on the A35 as well. And then on the back of the two devices, as I mentioned, we're getting an updated camera module here, but otherwise they look very similar. So in conclusion, if I had to choose between these two devices, I would go for the A36 just because it is newer and it does have that Snapdragon processor. However, if you are someone who values having an SD card slot, then go for the A35 5G. This phone is also probably less expensive compared to the A36 because it has been out for a while, and you can probably even buy one refurbished or used. I also do appreciate too that the A36 can charge at basically double the speed compared to the A35, so that's another selling point for this device. But I think really it comes down to the prices you can get one phone or the other for. So if you can get the A36 for the same price as the A35, obviously think of some of those downgrades like the features that were removed, but beyond that, you might want to just go for the newer phone. But I'm definitely curious to know what you think here. This is the Samsung Galaxy A36 5G versus the Samsung Galaxy A35 5G. I'll see you in the next video. Take care and have a great rest of your day.